it is a psychological blow to the Russian command because Russia has a big problem with its military command operationally forward in Ukraine, but also back.
Hello and welcome back to Superpowers, the future of global security with me, James Heapy. Today we are joined by a great friend of the show on at least his fourth, possibly even fifth visit, Robert Fox, the defense editor for the Evening Standard. Robert, you're always welcome. Thank you for joining us. And as ever, we have got a busy set of world events to reflect on. And also, I'm keen to tap into your expertise on a number of UK defense and security matters as well. But look, let's start with the Russians. And there's been an assassination attempt on Lieutenant General Vladimir Alexeyev. He's in hospital after being shot. He is the deputy chief of the main directorate of the General Staff of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Robert, armies that are in the ascendancy and who are prosecuting successful campaign plans are on the verge of victory tend not to see their senior generals being attempted assassinations. So what does this tell us?
Well, hello, James, and thanks for inviting me. Let's get to Lieutenant General Alexeyev. Not a random target. The Russians have in the past tried to indicate that, this is pure serendipity, it's opportunism. Interestingly, with this assassination attempt, unlike the several ones that have occurred up to and during the Ukraine campaign, they were car bombings by and large, a scooter bomb, you may remember. This was a shooting and a carefully chosen target because he was deputy head of defense intelligence, military intelligence. You probably don't know, and I can't immediately reach out for the name of Adrian Byrd's deputy in defense intelligence in the UK. Very different, because Alexeyev ran the defense intelligence operation in Syria. And that's how I suspect whoever they were, and probably they were pro-Ukrainian, but not necessarily so. We know there are several groups running around inside Russia. It was a carefully selected target, and it has enormous propaganda value, not necessarily with the Russian people, but within the Russian ranks. They're getting to the right people. And I think that this will go on. You can see the hands of the amazingly capable intelligence brain of Kirill Budanov, a former head of PSYOPs, military intelligence, and now the chief of staff to the president of Ukraine. Ukraine is having a really, really rough time, and they're freezing, and they're trying to very cruelly just knock out the civilian population. But whatever they're talking about, all my friends coming back from Ukraine are saying the one thing they're not talking about is surrender or giving it up, giving up now. And meanwhile, as I said, it is a psychological blow to the Russian command because Russia has a big problem with its military command operationally forward in Ukraine, but also back. I mean, the analogies, would you believe it, have even been drawn with Stalin after his purges, where he got rid of an enormous number of generals between 36, 37, 38 were the really bad ones, and then was very fortunate to come up with Georgy Zhukov, who could take over the thing from him and actually could mount a counterattack, which was not a given from 1941. That is huge scale. But also the prospects for, as regards warfare since 1945 in Europe, this is big scale. And whatever the Russians are saying, they're not winning. The Ukrainians are not winning, but they're not losing. I mean, when I saw something like sort of 0.08% of territory was taken in all last year, 25, hard campaigning, at a casualty figure of about 415,000. They think they can go on 11 months, but that is it. And the economy really is showing serious cracks now.
You see, those numbers are extraordinary, aren't they? The casualty numbers, but I think we we forget, I mean, nothing's really changed since the First or Second World War. Russia's capacity to endure that sort of human loss is greater than almost any other country on earth. Um, and a lot of that is to do with Putin lying to his people about the scale of the losses. But I do also think there is something about the Russian national psyche that is um, that is incredibly robust and resilient. But the economic issue is equally pressing. I think it's quite interesting that the reports this week around these talks in Abu Dhabi suggest that Putin is every bit as keen to keep Trump engaged in a peace process as Zelensky is, and that sort of nods to the fact that I think Putin thinks that Trump is more likely to support a peace deal that favors the Russian position, but also that Putin, I suspect, is aware that he's on a burning platform and that, a peace that is in his favor now is better than, things running to a standstill in a year's time.
I think with Putin, I think it's a paradox, isn't it? I think in a way we're wrong to focus exclusively on Putin, saying that this is Putin's war. Without Putin, it would all be over. Not true. As you've rightly fingered, it's about Russia. And it's about the mindset and a collective mindset that Russia is in. And it's historic. It goes on and on because it is Russia. We are great. And you get a parallel with China, but it's different because it's Confucian there. But we are dominant. We know we're superior, but you are not recognizing our superiority. And that's why people like Sarah Rainsford of the BBC, who's particularly good on Russian mental culture, in saying that this really will go on and on until you get disconnect. And you got disconnect in 1917, where the Tsar, the leadership was completely out of touch with a starving army then. Now, we haven't quite got a starving army, but we've got in many areas now a deeply deprived army. Bad medical care, bad casualty recovery, bad care of recovery of the dead, even. And if the key is turned in the wrong direction, that could count, because it counted very oddly at a much lower casualty rate from the expedition, the excursion, big one, into Afghanistan, 79 to 89. The Afghansi, in the breakup of the Soviet Union, the Afghan veterans were a critical element in the rise and then the demise of Gorbachev and then Yeltsin. So this is a very peculiar thing. It's when things break down, and I think particularly Kirill Budanov, but some of the new leadership in the Ukrainian military really spot it. And that's the thing we don't really spend enough. I'm not talking about psyops, but I'm talking about psychological warfare. And that's how the Ukrainians will try and maintain them. This is a critical year. Russia can go on at the present level of attrition. The calculation is for about another 11 months. Whether Ukraine can, without some kind of dramatic assistance, and odd things are happening, which I hope we'll talk about, like Starlink, it is helping them. What I think the Ukrainians must be very worried about is the callowness of support from countries like Britain and the ambivalence, as you rightly said, of Trump-Witkoff. I mean, Witkoff is completely off the pace now because he still thinks it's a property deal about Donbass. It's way beyond that now. It's about all kinds of other things. And that's why we must fear there may be some very odd pieces of real action, false flags, all around the clock, from North Africa through to the Eastern Mediterranean, to the Black Sea, to the Baltic, to the Arctic. An odd little expedition. Capture of a Norwegian border force, for example. They're probing into Estonia, and we've got to be up to it. I also fear, which melds into what we might talk about, the stasis, the complete logjam of British defence posture and policy, is that they might try even some asymmetric attack on a country very vulnerable like the UK. The watchword is it has to be utterly deniable. But I can see it happening. After all, they did Skripal, a rogue drone at Gatwick Stansted, Felixstowe container port. Entirely possible.
Well, you have teed up the next three questions for yourself in a way that I suppose reflects your long career as a journalist. Let's pick up on psyops.
Sorry, that's an oxymoron. I think any card-carrying reporting journalist does not have a career.
Let's pick up on psyops and the asymmetric Ukrainian challenge to Russia, Starlink and other vectors for leverage over the Russian effectiveness, and then get into UK defence. So firstly, on the psyops question, Robert, I mean, I agree with you. All of Ukraine's most spectacular success since the kind of counter-offensive of autumn 2022 has actually been when they have been imaginative and done things into Russia that are a bit cunning, a bit different. So the sort of the truck with the drones and various other things. Are assassination attempts, deep strike with imaginative drone solutions, cognitive warfare, cyber warfare, is that the way that the Ukrainians compensate for their lack of mass on the ground and pose Russia a challenge that would have real impact?
James, they have to, because you're quite right. They're thin on the ground. I mean, dangerously thin. This is the story of the Zaporizhia battle. They just can't keep the mass going. It's mix it up. And I detect Budanov's hand behind this, really mix it up, because we hear from Zaluzhny, the first commander-in-chief, now ambassador, trying to make some political comeback. I don't think he'll succeed, which is very traditional. Also the same with Syrsky, the current commander-in-chief, in that they are still children of their education. And remember, they did have a lot of Western input, but oh boy, there's a lot of old-style Soviet military science in there. And that's why people like Budanov are so imaginative. They're one-off. They're creative. And that is the way that they will succeed. And just look at what's happening in the Black Sea. There you can chalk up some net wins, practically, in a naval battle by a power which has no navy, which is bonkers if you think about it. But it's Sea Baby, the drones, a lot of Brit input there, but they've knocked Kazakhstan out of oil and gas export through the eastern Black Sea, through the main Russian ports there. That's 1% of the global hydrocarbon market, and particularly gas and oil. And that is what Venezuela has. For all Venezuela's riches, it only has 1%. When you think of the scale of that, and I think that they will keep on going. The thing about that they know, and Zelensky knows, that actually he has some really good creative thinking coming from his Baltic allies and his Nordic allies. And I think that he's turning around and ever so quietly saying, you UK, you're a leader of a formation like the Joint Expeditionary Force. Where are you? Don't just say we have given this, that, the other. By the way, we are providing stuff. We are providing drones. We are providing cheap, innovative kit that we should be providing our own armed forces for, but we won't for policy reasons. But it's actually where the creative end of British military thinking is going now. And I think that certainly in the commands they understand that. I don't think they understand it in Whitehall. Can I pass it? Least of all in Westminster. I think there are certain veterans like yourself that understand this, but we're asymmetric. There is a good side. There is a creative side to what the British contribution is, but it's very low level. It's quite tactical. But we're providing to Ukraine the stuff we should be providing for ourselves. The Starlink, very quickly, I'm amazed that Musk pulled the plug on Starlink, and it's really, and the personal drone attack and higher level operational drone attack, deep strike on the battlefront from Russia has gone down. I was looking at the figures quite dramatically, and it shows you how dependent Russia is. Technologically, Russia, even in the conventional war, is utterly dependent on China now. That is absolutely clear. The guidance systems for the drones, the guidance systems for the tanks, and so on. And it's quite a big setback. And it may be Musk doing his bit to say to Putin, Lavrov, the whole gang, come on, we've got to really talk. Because the talks that are going on in Abu Dhabi at the moment is still what's known as the Alaska position or the Anchorage position, because that's what happened on August the 14th at the summit in 2025. They pulled up, great meeting. They were going to have ceremonies and how we were going to share and exploit this, that, and the other, and Donbass would be settled, and we'd rip off Ukraine and Russia for all kinds of mineral concessions. And this was the great thing between Vitkov and Dmitriev. April Fool. Lavrov, the foreign minister, comes and says, no, we haven't changed at all. Denazify, neutralize, get rid of Zelensky, regime change, no more Ukraine. They hadn't changed at all. I'm convinced that Putin himself hasn't changed from that. But I think there are people we're now looking at lower down who are saying, oi, this really can't go on, because we are going to make a broken nation for a generation or two to come if we go on like this much longer.
Agreed. I want to get you onto UK defence. A reminder that we have a very, very large viewership in the United States and Canada, to whom some of this stuff won't be immediately in the front of their minds. But the UK, to sort of introduce the conversation, the UK hasn't been one of the biggest defence, or hasn't been one of the biggest defence spenders in the world for a while, but it has been second or third in NATO pretty much throughout the Cold War. And the secret sauce that the UK brought to global coalitions tended to be a permissiveness, a willingness to do the crunchier end of the fighting alongside the United States, and B, with Ukraine, to sort of go through capability thresholds in terms of the gifting of lethal aid ahead of other countries, so that other countries with bigger budgets would follow. And that gave us a degree of moral authority, even if our defense budget wasn't what it was in the Cold War. Robert, my fear is that we've sort of lost that moral authority now. We're not spending the money. We're not leading really in the thought leadership about how to challenge Russia. We're just, when I go to Berlin, when I go to Warsaw, I see governments that are reacting urgently to the threat and are putting money into their armed forces. And I fear that, when Donald Trump and JD Vance are so uncompromising in their language about European defense, if the UK thinks that they're talking about the continental Europeans and not us, they are sorely mistaken. I think in Washington there is real concern about where the UK is at in terms of its defense, and it is becoming a big strategic vulnerability. And your very sobering point that what better prize to sort of prove the futility of modern NATO than to mount a sub-threshold attack against the UK, against which the UK would have no defence nor no response. That's a really terrifying scenario. Tell us what you think is going on, why you think the money is being spent, and how the UK might be able to recover from this.
The problem is that the budget is still quite large, at around 60 billion. But it's very difficult to work out where exactly it's going. It is not nearly as innovative rather, as it should be. Physically, in terms of equipment, that's the easiest end to look at because it's most obvious. But it's in terms of personnel and the role of where the armed forces sit. That at their best, in terms of resilience, as we saw during COVID, they are a civic good. I think you could find very few people in the Labour Party, including those on the front bench, including veterans like Dan Jarvis, who would dare say that now. It is welfare, not warfare, is one element, but the other one, which surrounds the Prime Minister and his sidekick, Richard Hermer, the Attorney General, is lawfare, not warfare.
Yeah.
And this is why I think we have to be very serious about what happened to the Strategic Defence Review, where the Prime Minister typically said a lawyer's argument, convenient for the day, defence of this country, defence of the British people is right, left, and centre to my policy. No, it isn't. He hasn't shown any instinct for that at all. To the extent that the Strategic Defence Review hasn't been funded in the way that they suggested it would be, and it's going to be very difficult because it's jammed tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Very little extra funding has gone in, and most of that has gone on housing and welfare. They refuse to produce a defence investment plan. What are we going to buy next? What do we go for? What do we cut out? Where do we duplicate, or where do we contemplate? Where do we complement our allies? That is not being shared with the public at all. To the extent that the latest voices from within the defence investment plan actually should have come out within weeks after the defence review in June, say around September. It was postponed in December. It's been postponed again to March. We think now it's going to be postponed. This is for 2025, by the way, till possibly the summer, till after the local elections. There are some pretty ugly choices to be taken. I completely appreciate that, where there will have to be cuts and there will have to be move-arounds. There was a major reform that accompanied the Defence Review, which John Healey, the Defence Secretary, boasted about, the big reorganisation at the very, very top of the Defence Ministry. So you have a quartet that runs it. It's the Permanent Secretary. They come immediately under the Secretary of State, the Permanent Secretary, the Commander-in-Chief, the Chief of the Defence Staff, the Commander Nuclear, McTiernan, which is a very powerful organisation in this new institution, the National Armaments Directorate, which is supposed to sort out all these anomalies, these cost overruns, these very bad news things like Ajax. Whenever you think about Ajax, it's bad news the way it's been presented. Instead, we've got a jam that they all seem to be cancelling each other out. There is no momentum forward, and the commands, the people who have to put men and women and men into the field, have no long-term plan to follow. Are we going to go for tanks? Are we going to get rid of tanks altogether, which is a possibility? Are we going to go American, or are we going to develop with our allies a European and a non-American capacity like GCAP, Tempest, the sixth generation aircraft, which now, let's say, and they're weaseling about it again, Britain's participation in that program is now in doubt because they don't want to fund the next phase. I mean, this is what I'm not hearing from British sources. I'm hearing from Italian and Japanese sources, and they are very worried indeed.
I didn't know that. It's awful.
Yeah. And there are crazinesses going on at the moment. Okay, I've talked about the future of the main battle tank, and there is simply, I mean, the viewers would love to know. One of the simple problems with the enormous Challenger 3 tank is it weighs nearly 80 tons now. Now, there's no roadway or bridge in the highways of most of Europe, as well as Britain, that can take that. Do that. What is the future of the tank? How are we going to do it? But would you believe it? From the Treasury, who runs so much, far too much policy thinking in defence, what's the point of helicopters? This is what let's come up. What's the point of helicopters? Because you don't use helicopters in Ukraine. By the way, you do. And so they are pushing, and I'm afraid the previous Chief of Staff of the Navy wanted to do this. They're pushing that they cancel the proposed order for the medium-lift utility helicopter, which is $1 billion for it. There's only one final competitor in it, which is Leonardo UK, the Anglo-Italian firm, which has as its hub in Yeovil. And this government is prepared to contemplate, do let me go through this, the closing down of Yeovil altogether, the centre of the British helicopter industry such that it is, and they have not a bad machine. If that goes, Leonardo is questioning its basis in the UK. It's put a lot of its cutting edge work, personnel, into the GCAP and Wroughton in with BAE. They'll pull that out. They'll leave Britain to all intents and purposes. They'll leave some behind just to keep the Typhoon program going, where they're essential. But it's this kind of thing that I'm picking up. Sorry, this is not hearsay and gossip. I have had conversations with Italians who are deeply involved about this, and they've been talking to their Japanese colleague. What is absolutely clear is that the government is saying that there are no votes in defence, so they're going to starve defence. So they're raiding the piggy bank. So you have Chagos, you have the Afghan compensation, you have compensation for Northern Ireland injury coming out of it, even parts of the aid budget, possibly even the BBC World Service. I mean, it's actually it's Rachel Reeves' brand tub. You know, in the old fates, pick and mix, as they in the old Woolworths. And it is just a neglect. And I finish. The government has got a disconnect between hard power projection, defence credibility, conventional deterrence, and how important that is to any kind of independent UK foreign policy. End of rant.
Well, there's a heck of a lot in that. I mean, but it's interesting that somebody who has followed UK defence for as long as you have has been driven to such obvious despair by the government I was in and the government that has followed, that the spending doesn't match the threat. Just listening to you when you are so obviously in despair, and I understand why. I understand the threat. I understand the state of the force. I come at this from the same place as you do. But the danger is that 60 billion, to be in a position where it all sounds so helpless, it all sounds like we're so behind the curve, so incapable of defending ourselves, does cause, I think, in the public mind, like, geez, like, how much is this going to cost? Like, can we afford this? What's the penalty? Do we need to find a way of communicating the need that recognizes that the UK is still one of the world's foremost nuclear powers? It's got capabilities like, for example, nuclear powered submarines that few other countries can match. And that whilst the army is in urgent need of recapitalisation and would struggle to put a division in the field, the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy are still at the world's top table, albeit at the sort of cheaper end of the top table. We should despair. There's lots that needs to be done, but the public kind of shouldn't think that for 60 billion they're not getting anything.
No, that's absolutely right, because and it's being missold. And I don't blame the armed forces, because they're not allowed to under the law. But what governments, including yours, by my say, didn't sell the defence and resilience argument, because defence. The thing is, this is where nearly 60 years in journalism, all but a year, really teaches me. You have witch words, as in things with a steeple hat, and things like defence are horrible. Nobody likes the word defence, and resilience, by the way, is going the same way. But it is terribly important. Supposing you did have an unfortunate drone incident, say, at Stansted, but you had weird weather at the same time, which took out the grid across 3.5 counties entirely, possible, and the beginning of a bird flu foot and mouth type pandemic. You would need a resilient force. That's what the strategic reserve will be for, primarily, oddly. You must have the vestigial capability to fight and defend, but it's contributing to the public good. And of course, they are so ideologically focused in their vocabulary, all political parties at the moment, they're not thinking through their problem. Because things like the armed services will produce something for the aging volunteer section, which you're going to need of society, which you're going to need in an aging society. And I'm embarrassed to say, countries that I love very much and have worked with and have had a rotten time, not being particularly well managed at the time, but the 3 Mediterraneans, Greece included, or that are getting its debt down, Italy, Spain. Funny old thing. They're addressing these problems head on and saying what they are. And that's where I think there is something in our culture of public service education that really needs retooling. But we have to have it, because unless we have it, we will have people like the big tech bros. Now, this sounds extreme, I know, who say, what's the point of representative democracy? It gets in the way of everything. We'll tell you what to do.
I'm conscious that time is against us, and as ever, I could sort of sit and record with you for hours. Do the
I don't believe in
I,
podcasts, by the way.
well, look, I want to sort of just get your take in our last few minutes together on Iran, please. I know you've got some real expertise, and I I find it quite interesting. The Iranian response is necessarily bullish when you've got the Abe Lincoln carrier group bearing down on you. You probably got no option but to sort of stand tough. But is it just rhetoric, or actually do you think the Iranians can credibly see a way to hold off the might of the United States?
Well, the Abraham Lincoln isn't. Do you remember on that deck, famously, the words "mission accomplished" were pronounced by George W. Bush. Now, the problem is, if the Abe Lincoln was serious, it would have another one beside it. And they can do it, but it's a pinprick. They can only do, it'll be very much a 10 or 12-day bombing or whatever that they saw. To come off that, Iran is beginning to emerge as a wicked problem, a problem with no obvious solution. And it's for this reason. And I was listening to the broadcast about it today because of the talks beginning with Witkoff again. Again, it's not going to be a deal about this and about that. Very interesting the way the Iranians are trying to screw down the agenda to be only about uranium enrichment and potential nuclear power. They don't want to talk about missiles, of which they have an ominously capable force of missiles and attack drones. And that is the point. And that's when America, Israel, and allies will have to react. If it looks as if they're going to go for a saturation attack, where you get hundreds in the air, then it is a big threat to Israel, to the UK bases in Cyprus, the bases all up and down the Gulf. And it looks as if they are preparing for something, because you only would need 12 of the big ones to get through on Israel, and it's really, really very serious. It threatens so much of the future. So that would be the trigger, but there is no answer. Regime change is not on the cards because there's no regime to change it to. And it's such a complexity of the way things are arranged, and it's security and fear and official fear in depth. And you have these interlocking things. They're not even a unified force, the Revolutionary Guard force, but they do deals amongst each other. But what we're not focusing on, and I think that this will blow the whole thing up, is how dire the economy is, but also conditions of life in so many parts of Iran. We're not hearing nearly enough about the effects of climate change, desertification, Tehran running out of water, people actually starving. I don't mean to be facetious about this, because this triggers a lot of the peripheral insurgencies, because it is quite clear the chronic Baluch nationalist insurgency is going on and is very serious. The calculations from very responsible people like Ali Ansari and their equivalent inside the FCDO, where we have real expertise, is this can go on for quite a bit. But the regime is drawing in itself. And one very serious diplomat with absolute hands-on experience put it to me, I give it 5 weeks, 5 months, or 5 years, and they may be able to tough it out for 5 years. But really, this regime, because the ethos of the Islamic Revolution of 79, of Ruhollah Khomeini, and then the gang, and it is a gang round Ali Khamenei. It's a club, it's a clique, it's a mafioso group of ayatollahs, on the one hand, who reach into certain parts of the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, they can only sustain it for so long. It's a fascinating and really rather terrifying example, because it's a big country, 92 million, third largest oil and gas reserves in the world, second largest gas, if you could really look at it. And that means something, and it isn't working. And it hasn't got a currency that functions. And so we're on eggshells. And I think Trump, curiously, I don't know who's behind it, I suspect it's his son-in-law, above all, and saying, go carefully, go carefully. They're positioning things like the Abe Lincoln, but so has the UK, so has France, and we're up for the defense of the Cyprus bases because they're an international asset, the defense of, for us, the defense of Jordan, for the French protection of Syria. But a thing that, when I put it to John Healey last year, how vulnerable we were there, and he just sloughed it off and said I was talking nonsense and nobody had mentioned to him. I think the Straits of Hormuz are really very worrying because they're doing live firing exercises. They've hinted at mining, and they've hijacked 2 tankers in the last 24 hours there.
I know for all of the chat from the clean energy lobby, I think people forget just that the Straits of Hormuz remains every bit as geostrategically important as it's been for decades, and we ignore it at our peril. Robert Fox, Defense Editor of the Evening Standard, it has been a pleasure to have you on Superpowers again. Please come back again soon to talk more. Everybody always enjoys dipping into your expertise and the vast experience you have around the world of following conflict, and therefore few people better qualified really to discuss how the world should respond.
I really do enjoy it too.
No, you're too kind. You're too kind. Well, look, come back and watch more Superpowers next week, but also make sure you subscribe to the channel for more of the Trump Report and Frontline as well. But for now, I'm James Heapy. Robert Fox, thank you very much. See you next week. Goodbye.